Well, President Trump certainly got a much nicer reception from Sarah Netanyahu than he did from Melania in Israel.
Oh, we stop it. No, she was just telling him, be presidential.
She swatted his hand away.
She keeps him in line because you're supposed to meet the other, prime minister who's waiting to meet you, not to coddle with your wife.
Must have had an argument on Air Force One. Here's Sarah Netanyahu and, of course, her husband, Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, receiving President Trump and his wife Melania on the tarmac.
I talk every day about how great he is, how great you are.
I can testify to that.
Because the majority of the people of Israel, unlike the media, they love us. So we tell them how you are great and they love you.
We have something very much in common.
Very much in common. We talk about it.
So what she was saying, I know it's difficult to hear, but she said, I talk every place about how great she is, meaning Melania, and how great you are, said Sarah Netanyahu to President Trump. I can testify to that, said Bibi, jumping in, because the majority of people in Israel, unlike the media, they love us, so we tell them how you are great, so they love you, she continued. And then she, as she was speaking, President Trump leaned over to Bibi and said, we have very much in common. Netanyahu replied, sounds familiar, and then Sarah added, we'll talk about it over dinner. So, a celebratory mood with the Trumps arriving in Israel, Trump being the first president to visit the Western Wall, the holiest of Jewish sites. Mm-hmm. And the reason so celebratory was summed up in one single sentence from Bibi.
I want you to know how much we appreciate your bold decision to act against the use of chemical weapons in Syria. And I want to tell you also how much we appreciate the reassertion of American leadership in the Middle East.
Yes.
Yeah, he made that bold leadership.
Reassertion. Right. Because it had not been asserted other than falsely with the lead sponsor of terrorism in the world, Iran. Not somebody that Bibi views as a partner in peace, not somebody that Trump views as a partner in peace. For more on this and other topics, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Jed Babbin, former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense and contributor to the Washington Times and the American Spectator. Jed, the president's trip to Saudi Arabia and now Israel has been very successful and tragically, ironically timed with the attack last night.
Well, yeah, I think he's done very well. He did pretty well in Saudi Arabia, telling them that the ideology of terrorism, which of course is the main Wahhabist ideology, which is the main reason Saudi Arabia exists, that's a wicked, evil, and I think he said craven ideology. He basically told them to get their own houses in order, which is certainly different from which President Obama had said many years ago, 2009 in Cairo, and even since. And he did a very good job. Basically he did not bow to the Saudi king. Melania didn't wear a headscarf, and that's pretty much 2 for 2 right there.
And he also said it should be, a shared responsibility with, eradicating jihadists. Do you think that they were listening, or were they just nodding their heads and, trying to get through the moment?
No, Amy, they wouldn't even nod their heads. I mean, there was not a single line of applause there. I mean, he stopped at one point early in the speech, a pause for an obvious applause line, and there was dead silence. Nobody nodded, nobody shook their heads in agreement, nobody smiled, and they listened to him, barely, politely. Some of them were actually showing, their faces showed anger. So, I think that's a pretty good deal. So we'll just have to see if it plays out. It's not going to happen. The peace in that area is not going to happen. They are not going to change their ways. And, we'll just have to see how Mr. Trump deals with Israel and Iran, because, as you were saying a moment ago, a lot of people believe that they're the chief sponsor of terror. I'm one of them. I think if anyone doesn't believe that, they're just hiding their head in the sand.
Well, I'll tell you, James Freeman over at the Wall Street Journal had some good institutional memory comparing Trump's stops, in particular his speech in Saudi Arabia, to President Obama's initial foray. So apples to apples, when President Obama spoke in 2009 and essentially made the case as to why Muslims shouldn't trust the United States and faulted the United States for things like the failure of things like the existence of Gitmo. In addition, I mean, he was um, such genuflection before the House of Saud did Obama. He said the struggle for women's equality continues in many aspects of American life and in countries around the world, especially a moral equivalence between how women are treated in America and how women are treated in Saudi Arabia. Very different tone, not just from President Trump, but also from Ivanka in Saudi Arabia.
Well, much more importantly, I think the tone was set best by Defense Secretary Mattis last week, just the day before the president left on his trip. He made a little announcement that, the president has enabled us to run the military campaign against ISIS without political interference. And so we've decided we're going to surround and annihilate them. You know, that's the kind of cold, clear, crisp sort of thinking that we haven't seen in this town for, 10 years, more. That's the thing you're looking for from Mr. Mattis. I think that's the kind of thing that Mr. Trump is probably going to allow them to continue to do because he wants the generals to run the show, and that's the right thing to do. All this stuff, the pomp and circumstance, some of it's good, most of it's meaningless. I think if he's really going to dig in and do something right, he's going to have to cancel the Obama agreement with Iran, and he's hedged on that. He's hedged on bringing the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, apparently to win points with Mahmoud Abbas, and try to restart the so-called peace talks there, which, as we've seen year after year after year, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, other presidents have tried, but do you think he'll be successful? I mean, he was boasting that he's going to bring peace in the Middle East.
Well, I hope he is. I really think it's a 1 in 10 quadrillion shot. I don't think it's going to happen. I think he can try. I just hope he does not waste a whole lot of his political and diplomatic efforts on it because it's not going to really succeed until, certain things happen. Number one, we're going to have to tell the Palestinians that they cannot come back to Israel in tens of millions. We're going to have to tell the Palestinians that they're going to have to settle for land, which is the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, and not a contiguous country. We're going to have to tell the Palestinians that if they have a country, it's not going to be armed. It's going to be disarmed. Because if those things don't happen, you cannot make peace. And the Palestinians, number one, will never agree to those terms. And number two, it's just a fantasy to really think that anything better can happen in that area.
President Trump moves from Israel today to the Vatican tomorrow for his first meeting with Pope Francis. Maybe he'll ask him about that Venezuela situation and whether socialism is the model that Pope Francis thinks it is.
Well, I don't think he's going to be that rude. I think he's going to be like most presidents who go to the Vatican. He'll be very respectful. He'll be very conscious of the Catholic religion, which he should be, and basically give a good hand to the Pope. He's not going to criticize the Pope for things like that, although he could. This is a very political Pope, unlike what we've been used to for the past 50 years. But that's the way Pope Francis wants to run things. That's the way he's going to run them.
I wanted to ask you about the terrible bombing in Manchester at the Ariana Grande concert last night. Is this our new reality? I mean, you have an American pop star icon at a sold-out concert in Manchester, UK, and they're targeting children. Is this what we should – is this the new normal?
Yes, it is, especially in Europe. The Brits are much better than most of the other European countries in trying to prevent this sort of thing. They've got very good, well-thought-out and well-knit intelligence agents working on these things. But this is the new normal in Europe, and unfortunately it's going to be, to some extent, the new normal here as well, unless and until we defeat the threat of terrorism, which we've talked about many times. And all I can tell you is I think that this is something that's going to continue. It's continued through Paris, Brussels, London. I mean, this goes back to the London 2005 bus and train bombings. This is nothing really new. It is the new normal, frankly, since 9/11. And I just noted a side note. I didn't know who Ariana Grande was before this happened.
Really?
Maybe I'm just old.
No, but I mean, they're
you strike-
teenagers, and I've kids that love her.
Yeah, Brad, it's fun. It's a bit surprising. You strike me as kind of a pop top 40 kind of guy.
Yeah, well, not really. You know, I'm
You're
very
more-
boring. I just
You're
read
more
the news and
you're more of a Sia fan. Is that what you're trying to say? You're like your Taylor Swift a little bit more. Is that the point?
at least I know who she is.
Okay.
Yes, okay, that's good. That's, you can go back there.
All right, so
Anyway.
bringing it back to our shores, you've still got the Democrats' focus on Michael Flynn, and of course the appointment of the special counsel Mueller, and Flynn's decision yesterday to plead the Fifth. How did you interpret that decision?
Well, it's not an admission of guilt. General Flynn obviously has some problems. I'm told that he is believed to have lied to the FBI in interviews with them, and of course that's a very specific federal crime.
Right.
So I think he's got some fairly big worries, but I just still don't see any evidence. I mean, we had a couple of weeks ago Obama's Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, say there's no evidence of collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. Senator Dianne Feinstein, who's not exactly a conservative, came out and said the same thing last week. She's the ranking Democrat on the Intelligence Committee. So, if there's no evidence, there's no evidence. I wish, former Director Mueller every success, but I just worry that this is the kind of thing that's going to go on for years and years and years and go off in all sorts of directions, which these special prosecutors usually do.
He is Jed Babbin, former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense, a contributor to the Washington Times and the American Spectator. Jed, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, my pleasure, guys.
Let's go to Greg in Schaumburg. Hey, Greg.
Just picking up on his new normal content, there is definitely something that changed with Trump that we all have to, recognize that this is not Obama over there. We have exactly the opposite of what Obama would have done with Trump, and this is more representative of what America is standing for. And then the second point is we could lose it so easily if we don't get our act together as Republicans and make stands against the Democrats, because we're going to have the midterms coming up. If we don't do well there, we're going to lose the House.
Thanks for the call, Greg. Also, thanks for the cartoon of me and my new dog.
Oh, yeah.
I appreciate that. That was very well done. Thank you,
That was
Greg.
sweet.
I tweeted it.
I will post it if you'd like. It just seems like it's a horrible morning to do so.
I tweeted it. We got to have a little levity in life, too, here, even
All right,
in difficult mornings. Thanks, Greg.
It's news, opinion,